Well, thanks for coming. This is a brand new presentation I put together. Just some of my
This
things.
conference has been running for a long duration.
Oh,
Please press star 1 to continue with this conference.
do we want to continue?
Otherwise, your conference will be disconnected in 1 minute.
The British are too efficient.
Thank you. Your conference will
All
now
right.
carry on.
So yeah, this will be fun. It'd be great to hear y'all's input as we go over this or afterwards. And what I want to do, I've worked in like analyst and strategy and now marketing positions, and I want to kind of tell you like what I figured out this cloud native thing means. Because when I started at Pivotal about a year ago, it was clearly like some marketing snake oil that we had come up with, and other people. And now there's like some consortiums named that. But like I just saw that there's a book that just came out called like Cloud Native with Go. And so like it must be legit if someone's written a book about it with some wackadoodle language. So I just kind of want to go over what this phrase is because we use it a lot, and it's good to have more definition around it than just being whatever something you're watching to buy. So first, that's me up there. And to give you some background, like we went over previously, like I said, I've been an industry analyst a couple times, a little firm called Red Monk, and I've also worked in corporate strategy and M&A at Dell, and I was a developer for quite some time before all of that here in town. I've been in Austin all my life. Now I work in basically a sort of like, I guess you could call it an evangelist role, working on explaining what it is we do at Pivotal and how we help people out and all of that sort of stuff. And I do a lot of podcasts. Like there's a weekly one, more or less weekly one I do called Software Defined Talk. It's pretty exciting and a bit revolved if you like that. And if you like my my style of nonsense, there's all sorts of stuff out there for you to engage with. That being my brand and all, you can engage with it. So I like to begin my talks with conclusions. That way you can leave or go use the restrooms as we were just talking about, or sort of like check on your email, do whatever it is you need to do. But at least for this part, you know, don't read your email too closely, maybe Twitter or Facebook. That way you can pay half attention. So in trying to figure out what cloud native is and kind of like what I don't know, what you would do with it, why you would do it and what it is. Like I like to start off, as with all sort of big shifts in IT, like what the, I don't know, the business driver is, why you would do it, why you would go through all this pain of doing something different and new. And as I'll get into briefly, I think if you look at the way that businesses have been operating, there's this interesting buzzword, if you're interested in this, called transient advantage, where you have less time to take advantage and basically milk your advantages to make a business out of it than you used to, right? You can't really be like Mr. Burns, just sort of like enjoying your high barriers to entry in your market, making money off of stuff. You actually have to like try, as we've seen. Now, we of course work in the IT world and the software world, so that very quickly, because we don't know anything about like logistics or like other stuff like that, maybe those you ship it people down the street do. But like, you know, essentially what that means is like, so what can we in the IT department do to help with that? And if you think about the state of what software is, we don't really treat software like this, as we'll get into, but software can basically, you know, as fast as you can type and compile, do whatever you want. Like it's extremely fungible. And you can make it fiddle around and fit to whatever it is your business might want to do if you have the right kind of process and sort of platform and technology in place to do it. So you can start to see that if businesses and organizations like need to change around what their goals are and what they're doing, you need to start having your software match that as well, which that kind of thinking and notion really started a lot of agile software development thinking back in, when was that, 2001, and I think XP came out in 99, but it's finally sort of like, I don't know, works this time. Like for mainstream people, it's finally catching up with the vision and the dream for it. So having been an analyst, and definitely now at Pivotal, where I go talk with prospects and customers a lot, there's 3 technologies that are helping satisfy this idea of helping companies innovate and do more and sort of work in more of a transient advantage era and helping them be more agile. And those 3 areas are mastering, getting set up with continuous delivery. So that sets up the why. This is the thing that you want to set up that allows you to deploy your software on a daily or weekly basis so that you can start studying and learning from it. And what your software starts looking like is following a microservices approach. And I don't really mention this here, but also following a lot of 12-factor principles that run on the platforms that you're doing so that they're not like traditional 3-tier application principles. I don't know how many factors are in that. And then also the how of how you do it, the process starts to look a lot like DevOps and indeed starts to be that thing. And it's sort of little wonder that these 3 things coalesce together because those are a lot of at this point, it's all sort of like a circular reference to each other, but these are the things that have been emerging over the past 10 years that have really made the use of custom written software fit this model of wanting to be more adaptable to what businesses want. So what we've been seeing is that whenever you take this approach where you want to put continuous delivery in place, essentially, so you want to start deploying weekly, if not daily, and studying that and deploying again, you end up having a platform. Now, how you get to this idea of a platform, you might build it yourself, and you see a lot of the sort of like large companies that are famous for this having done this over the last 10 or 15 years, from Amazon to Facebook to Google. All of these people had to build their own platform. They didn't, call up your former employee Oracle and have them ship a bunch of app servers to them. They had to write things from the ground up to fit this way of doing software development. So thankfully nowadays, I mean, it may not be thankfully if you like tinkering and doing stuff all on your own, but there's a lot of vendors who, and also open source projects that are selling platforms in there. And you see this especially in kind of like the container fueled frenzy that everyone follows, where everyone's trying to figure out what's this platform that I use to get all of these containers up and running, to get this cloud that I'm building, this cloud native approach up and running. So I'll go over briefly, I think one of the better cuts we have about what you need your platform to do, so you have an idea of what the requirements or the capabilities are, so you can start to think about it and evaluate it. And then finally, depending on, I always say that, like, especially at Pivotal or if you're at any vendor, like, it's difficult to convince people who work at tech companies of this, because I was joking with someone earlier, you hire a bunch of programmers so you don't have to spend any money on software, right? You want the programmers to solve all your problems. But again, what we've been seeing, especially with customers that we have, and when I look at our competitors as well, from an industry analyst perspective, there are a lot of companies who, just like they don't want to write their own file system or operating system or something like that, they want to find a ready-built platform. And I don't really have like a competitive landscape slide in here, or a slide, something that goes over everything, but there's all sorts of options out there. And what we've been seeing over and over again is that it's probably not a good idea to build your own platform at this point. Like, there's a few sort of last gasp of open sourcing things of people who are forced to build their own platforms. But there's probably, I'm kind of doing this off the top of my head, but there's probably 8 or 10 different platforms out there that you could start using and join up to instead of having to build your own thing. Unless you really like building file systems and things like that. So let's get into the first part. Like I said, I like to, now I'm going to go over everything I just said. So, you can check up on what's going on the internet or whatever it is you like doing. So this idea of transient advantage, I think is if you're kind of into this kind of strategy stuff, it's kind of a fascinating notion. And if you're familiar with sort of like traditional corporate strategy or business strategy, sort of that kind of originated with Michael Porter and BCG and stuff like that. There's this great book, Lords of Strategy, you can go read, and it goes over kind of the post-World War II idea of what business is and how that came about. But there's long been this idea of competitive advantage, and the way of overly simplifying that, and think about how you are a customer of all sorts of businesses you interact with. Each of those businesses have some way of establishing why you go to them and give them your money instead of going to a competitor or doing nothing, right? And there's all sorts of ways in traditional thinking to establish competitive advantages. You've got your Porterian 5 forces, all sorts of, for all of the navel gazing and patterns and stuff that we have in the tech industry, the business industry has an equal, if not more, amount of it. There's lots more churn in it. But essentially, for a long time, what would happen as a company, like I joked about Mr. Burns earlier, is a company would set up what its competitive advantage was. And to use another phrase, they could just rest on their laurels and kind of milk that for a while. And anyone who has, like, I don't know, internet service knows how that works, or cable, or things like that. Like, you sort of put up these barriers to entry that not only make it hard for competitors to come in, but make it very hard for customers to leave, right? So, like, there's a way, that advantage that you establish is very sticky, to use a early 2000s term. Now, with the introduction of how basically like software that works on faster turns than 12 to 24 months, what we see is a lot of these unicorn people, right? This sort of like cats with golden guns riding unicorns and everything. And people can start using software to very quickly erode and break down competitive advantage. So, here in Austin, we have normally we would cite someone like Airbnb, but we have HomeAway, right? Like, that's a great example of someone using software to really disrupt what was infamously a very hard to disrupt industry. There's some fancier name, but the hotel industry. Like that was always a mystery for like MBA scholars, business B school scholars, about why the hotel industry hadn't ever been disrupted. And it turns out that like, by having teams of developers working on software on fast turns and things like that, like by being as close to cloud native as a company that started when HomeAway did, like you can actually go against these big gigantic chains and start to like break down and compete with them and wear away their competitive advantage. And you see this, whether it's, the stereotypical thing here is to think about Uber and things like that. But you also see this at other places that are a little less interesting. Like here in town, we have, there was an announcement of Instacart partnering with Whole Foods, and they're at HEB. And like, if you live in New York, it's like no big deal to have your groceries delivered. But here in Austin, it's amazing, right? Like that's a strange notion that you could have groceries delivered to your house. And all of these things, all of these companies pictured here that you can think of, most of the time, as far as I found, they're using software, what we would now call a cloud native approach to do this. So it's not so much that you want to go and like kick sand in the other people's space. In fact, many of the people that we work with, they're companies who are trying to prevent this from happening to themselves. They're trying to use those same powers of software to retain their current customers in business and grow their businesses. And there's a fun fact here you can go look up that and not all of this is caused by software. There's all sorts of other things, whether it's sort of like having to compete globally and just also the craziness of the past, craziness in a good way, the past 20 years. But for a long time, if you were on the Fortune 500 list, you would stay on there forever, for decades. It was very stable. But since 2000, a couple of people have studied this, but this is the most provocative one. Since 2000, like just a little over 50% of them are no longer there. They've been cycled out. Some of them have probably been acquired and merged, which is kind of a cheat for the figure. But essentially, they've dropped out of there, and other people have entered into it, which is kind of nutty, right? So like you really do have this era of transient advantage, where as a company, you've got to try to survive as much as possible. So then we have this exciting chart. When I want to depress myself, I look at this frequently. And this is basically, it's only 80 organizations they asked, but Cutter, where I got this from, is pretty legit. And it's this 3-year thing where they've asked people, how is IT doing as far as helping out the business, right? What's IT's role in business innovation? And you can see, this is where doing things relative is always nice, because 56% looks awesome compared to those other ones, but it's actually not. So your baseline is terrible. It's like the old, was it the ad guy who said that like 50% of my ad spend, it works, I just don't know which 50%. And like it turns out that was the case, and it probably is the case with IT. Like you have no idea if your IT spend is working or not, which I used to work at BMC where we were all into business service management, and we still haven't solved that problem of like making sure that your IT is being spent well. And you can see it dropping down to about a third of IT. So, this chart isn't sort of like superly scientific or whatever, but chances are this is probably what your intuition tells you about IT in most companies, how it's performing, right? It's not always sort of the star of the show. Spend a lot of time thinking about Windows 10 upgrades and making it hard to log into your VPN instead of helping the business innovate. Maybe that's just the companies I've worked for. So on all of that, like wrapping up the business portion here, this is kind of like the theory that I have going about what cloud native is, and it creates a lot of the why of what cloud native does, and that is that we're in this era of transient advantage, which I spend a lot of time talking about. You've always got to be innovating and coming up with new things as a company to not only stay alive, but hopefully to grow as well. And in large organizations, we sort of intuitively know this, and you can find any survey to show that IT isn't really. It's not typically. There are examples where this is not the case, but like IT is not really thought of as they're like the weird uncle that you don't really want to invite to your holiday dinner. they're really not very like great as far as what they're doing. So it seems to me, and what I've observed, having been an analyst and worked on strategy and now at Pivotal, is we need to change around how it is IT operates and what they do. And I think this is an important part, because for as much as I might make fun of IT, being a software developer, I feel like it's my prerogative to make fun of everything in the world. Like the way IT is set up is exactly what they were asked to do like 15, 20 years ago, right? Control costs, optimize, guarantee uptime and service. Like they deliver on exactly what they were asked to do. But now what we need to do is update it and start asking them to do new things. And usually, if you sort of like get them out of their Eeyore dumps, they're pretty up to the task. But you've got to start reinventing, as we would say in marketing world, transforming what it is they do. So let's go over just 2 sections briefly, and then we'll get a demo of some of this stuff in action, of what it looks like to rethink what IT is, transform what IT can do for the business. And hopefully at some point you start thinking of it as IT, and it's just sort of like the thing that runs the business for you. Which, if you think about those crazy cats riding unicorns, like they probably don't really think of it as the IT department that does all this stuff that runs their business. It's just part of the business that runs it, which would be a nice place to be in if you've been a computer nerd all your life. Finally get some respect. So first, we'll look at the process, and then we'll look over the tools part of it. There's some pivotal people doing something incredibly enchanting, I guess. So, as you can imagine from this screed about transient advantage and how businesses work, and IT is broken, it's been my observation, that the way that most people think about how they apply IT to, as we used to say, enable their business or helping run their business, is they have this hubris about they're a lot smarter and skilled about it than they actually are, right? They're like this well-coached guy up here who thinks we can put together a big gigantic plan. I'll send those nerds off for 12 months and they'll come back with the perfect solution, right? And it's almost like, especially for anyone who would show up to a cloud native meetup group, you're like, does anyone actually operate like that? That's crazy. Like that's insane. But I guarantee you, lots of people operate that way. And it's sort of it works. We can book, tickets on planes. We can transfer money. That way of doing stuff has worked for a long time, and it still kind of sort of works. But most people think on this big project plan way of doing things. They don't really have a way of adapting plans. And most of the people don't think like this dog down here, right? Where they have no idea what they're doing, right? And if you have no idea what you're doing, you have to at least be smart enough to set up a process by which you can learn and figure out what you're doing. And that's what our buddy up there who goes to get himself tanned every week or so doesn't really figure out. It's you got to put a process in where you're continually learning and doing things, and you think a lot more about resiliency of your business and your technology than about sort of perfection and documenting things to know it. So think about how you shift over from the top perspective to the bottom, right? From an idea where you're trying to always learn and do experiments and perfect what you're doing. And again, a lot of people that I end up talking with, they're sort of amazed that anyone would be like that person up there. But there's a lot of people, a lot of organizations who operate and function this way. So the best sort of, if I were to pick one thing, right? The best thing that I think epitomizes and kind of sums up getting to that approach where you're that lovely dog coating with a tie on, is taking more of a small batch mentality to everything, right? And you'll kind of see in this brief talk that I give here how the idea of doing a bunch of small things comes up over and over again instead of doing a handful or one big thing, right? And this is basically one way of thinking about doing continuous delivery or doing iterative development or all these sorts of things. But one of the things, we have a zombie outbreak again. One of the things I've actually just noticed that over the past year or so, especially when I present this idea of small batches, right? And just to summarize, right? You basically, as a developer, as a development team, every week, if not every day, you're going to have some idea of a feature, you're going to write that thing, test it, everything, and deploy it to production in that time period that you have, a week or a day, right? Seems obvious. I think the continuous delivery book was released in 2007, so we're all doing that now, right? But one of the things I realize as I talk with people more and more about this is they do more of I think what people call a water scrum fall. So developers and development teams are really good at building, to use another old term, that golden image. And then no one seems to ever deploy it, right? So the idea of doing small batches and continuous delivery, it doesn't actually apply if you're not actually deploying it to production and having end users use it. And that last mile, so to speak, makes all of the difference. And this idea of doing a series of small batches, it gets you all sorts of benefits. And they're kind of listed down there. And I wrote a column, I have a DevOps column at the Register. I wrote up, there's sort of 5 risks that help mitigate, which it's the Register, so you have to be very cynical. You could also call it 5 benefits that small batches give you. But basically, it helps you manage if you think about it, if you're doing things every week, and never mind every 24 hours, but you only have 7 days that you'll ever lose, right? So like from a risk management perspective, finance perspective, all sorts of things, you'll only ever lose 7 days versus like a year or 2 years, or like, you can think of like all the big tire fire projects that you read headlines about, and it's like, they've been working on this 3 years, and it still doesn't work. And it's because they're taking this larger batch approach of things instead of taking like eating the elephant bite by bite with a small batch. Now, the other thing that I think is nice about this is it gives you this feedback loop, which is the big superpower that Pivotal always tries to get people to have. And I think the overall cloud native world tries to get people to have as well, is that if you can deploy your software into production every week or every day, and you put in the effort to observe how people are using it, and you think about that, you can actually improve it. So you can start running experiments, right? And this is where a lot of the lean startup type of thing comes in. That essentially what I'm doing is trying to apply the scientific method to product development. So my theory is that if I don't know, put this wing ding up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, then good old Cote will be able to file his expenses more often and hate this software less, right? And like, so let's test that out. And like, if we can deploy that in a week and observe it for a week, and it may work or not work, and then we can actually improve the software, which is sort of amazing that you could improve software that quickly. But just that idea of improving software is itself a type of risk that you're managing against. So finally, before we get into the tools section, after a brief little, there's a fun little quote, anecdote about this that I found in a Forrester report recently. I'll show you. But this is a good way of benchmarking yourself about how you're doing with the practices that are commonly associated with not only a cloud native approach, but an agile approach. And the way to read this chart is from the Gartner AADI Summit. My little laser guy here isn't working, but that's fine. People in blue have been doing these practices from 2014 or before, and people in green are basically were doing them last year when this was done, so they were doing them then. So the green and the blue are good, right? And like, as you look at this, hopefully the thought you should be having is like, I thought we were doing better as software people, right? Like all of these things are for most of these, except for maybe DevOps and DevOps, all of these are like really old concepts, right? Like they're not very new, they're extremely well documented, they have lots of studies behind them. These are basically like the flossing of software engineering. And you're probably like me, you don't really ever floss, so that kind of gives your answer. But like, unit testing is easy and it's been around forever, so that's not a big surprise. But all these other things, like for the most part, lots of people are planning on doing this stuff. And they're not really behaving in a way that's like a very cloud native, agile way of going about doing things. But I think this is one good way to benchmark where you're at. And to the end of small batches, there's a fun case study of Humana following this cloud native approach to kind of prove a lot of what I was going over with, where they got to the point where they were able to deploy software very quickly and they could deploy this Q app. I used to use this, but I don't use it anymore. It's a fun app to make you feel guilty about how unhealthy you are. But there's this great study. It was anonymized in a Forrester report, and it's lead gen by like Iron Forge or something, so you can go look it up for free. But as you can see, that this person at a large bank was looking at their portfolio, and they figured out that of all of the projects they did on a small batch turn, right, a quarter or less, it would succeed 80% of the time. And the ones that would take a year or more would fail 80% of the time, right? Which is like, it's kind of a crazy eye-catching notion there. And if you've ever tried to highlight something in PowerPoint, isn't it really odd that you can't do that? That's something you can ponder as you go home to see. No highlighting in PowerPoint. So let's go over the tools really quickly, and then we'll get a fun demo of some of them in action. Because I think when you talk about a lot of this stuff, it's sort of like, I'm telling you about ponies and utopias and stuff like that. And until you can smell, the smell of the pony, you don't really believe that it exists. So hopefully we'll get some smells in the room here after a while. But a lot of the tools, as ever can seem like this guy up here, I've never really figured out what it is he's trying to accomplish. I guess it's sort of wiping the soup off of his mustache. It probably is. As someone who has a big mustache, that would be anything to have. But a lot of the tools can kind of seem like this Rube Goldbergian contraption of doing stuff. But I think understanding what they are helps sort of guide your way into it and doing things in a cloud native way. And further gets to the point of this talk, defining what cloud native is and what it starts to look like. So here we are, if you remember from the conclusion. These are the three main pillars that at the moment I'm seeing represent what cloud native is. Now, with any analysis that you do of a concept, you make a lot of compromises. There's probably actually like 15 pillars. But these are like the big ones that you can kind of attach and that decompose into other ones. So the first one in the middle, it kind of embodies most everything I've been talking about here, right? That you set up not only a continuous integration process, so that when you check in your code, it integrates and it does that XP thing of making sure that everything actually works together and it's not just a works on my box situation. But you also have a continuous delivery pipeline set up where if you choose to, and oddly enough, not all people choose to do this, but if you choose to, you can actually automatically deploy from code check-in to testing to staging to production, all automatically at once. And you know, if you're doing like a one-line code of change, you've really gotten along the maturity cycle, you're doing this quickly, maybe that makes a lot more sense eventually to do things quickly. But the important thing that I like to emphasize about continuous delivery, regardless of how you set it up and what you do, like it's kind of crazy nowadays. There's so many options for doing in CI and CD than there used to be. Like every company seems to have an offering here, and there's a few, you know, there's the old Jenkins. I don't know if there's that many big open source things that are new, but everyone's doing that sort of thing. But what it emphasizes is having this end-to-end view of your software lifecycle process, to use a fancy word, right? And again, think back to like if you're a development team and you're locally optimizing, to use a bad phrase, on the fact that you can get everything done in a week, and then it's not your problem if it gets deployed to production. That's a little bit like, you know, I don't know, only teaching your kid like how to speak half of the words in the language. Like you need to have like a focus on the whole like life of your software, and you just start thinking about what it means to get it into production. And if you're building your software on a weekly iteration and you're not actually deploying it into production and observing it, you're not really fulfilling kind of the parenthood that it is to be a developer with a piece of software. You know, you just sort of like never move beyond works on my box or whatever. So that's my pitch to care about that. But that's what brings you into the DevOps area, right? It's sort of a natural thing that if you're going to be doing continuous delivery, you're automatically deploying things into production that the developers are doing. What you very quickly find is that not only do you need the operations people to be more knowledgeable about what your application is and be more up to speed on how it's doing, but you also need to have your developers start to write your application in a different way that can operate that quickly, right? The difference between the architecture and the way you develop software that not only runs on cloud platforms, but that is deployed every week, if not every day, is vast. It's a very different way of doing software. Like, I used to write package software, and like you can get away with all sorts of crazy stuff in a package software environment that you can in a constantly deployed environment. So, I haven't finished reading this book. There's a book that's almost out from O'Reilly called Effective DevOps, and so far that's been like the best overview of DevOps. There's one chapter in this book called I don't know, it's like the art of cloud system administration, and that actually has a very good overview of DevOps as well. But this Effective DevOps book is pretty good. So then finally, you know, sometime we need to actually write code. That would be nice. So over here in the third column, we have this idea of microservices. And like I said earlier, you could also think about 12-factor app development here and all of the stuff, from the perspective of this slide, the lower level stuff about different coding styles and things like that comes with it. But again, what we've been seeing from companies who have been successful with this cloud native approach, whether they work with us or whether they worked on their own or whatever over the past few years, is that the way they architect their application is, like I was saying, is much different. It's much more loosely coupled than we've ever seen before. It relies on very standalone services and the full gamut of what microservices gives you. And really, again, you can tell I'm more of a process person. This is one of the first, well, not one of the first, but it's one of the better process-based approaches to architecture, right? Like, if you think about how SOA with web services stuff eventually became very obsessed with interchange and the technology and the formats and all of this stuff. But it was never that obsessed. It was initially, but it didn't end up becoming obsessed with process and how you enable things to happen, right? It was more interested in data interchange, which is a sad route for it to go down. But microservices is much more based on thinking about the human element of things and architecting things to fit that way. So finally, before I wrap up here is the, like I was saying, you're going to end up with a system that runs all of this stuff. So if you follow down the logical path of I need to get continuous delivery in place, I want to start having a DevOps approach to thing where everyone is responsible for the product end to end, right? Operations people are involved at the beginning, developing people are involved at the end, and then also, in general, I would like it to work and run, right? You want uptime and resilience. This is one take from one of my teammates. He published this in O'Reilly Radar last fall about the requirements that you have essentially. And you can see the 12 factors there in the dark gray color if you're familiar with those. You know, check those out, check those up if you haven't read about them. But it's really the green part that Casey, the guy who did this, he kind of jokingly calls the minimal viable platform. Like these are the core functions that you need your platform, whether you make it on your own to do. And a lot of these things should seem obvious, hopefully, right? But you know, you're going to need to do monitoring and health management. You're going to have to route things around in your distributed application and so forth. And then also, because of the way usually, I don't know if this is 100% true, but for the most part, anyone who's doing a cloud native stuff, a cloud native approach to things, they generally are packaging and running things in containers. Like that might be hidden from the developers who are doing it. Like we're sort of like, nowadays you can run Docker containers in Cloud Foundry. But for a long time, just like Heroku, it wasn't really apparent. And like .cloud before Docker, it wasn't apparent that your stuff was being put in a container, but indeed it is. But containers generally are the way that you run these cloud native applications. And then you need sort of like the sort of light gray requirements over there. Those are things that help you manage workload placement and orchestration and all of those sorts of things. So this serves, one, from a marketing perspective, you should be like, oh, that's scary. It's a lot of stuff. I need someone to help me. But really, less cynically, it's more the idea of like, these are things that as an architect or someone kind of working about this system, it's a good idea to make sure whatever you're doing kind of can satisfy these things, because this is usually what you'll be encountering. So to try to reduce that down a bit and have like one of the more blatant commercial things in this presentation, like this is the layer caking that I generally think about it at, right? Like, so whenever you do any kind of software, and I just put cloud native in here because here we are at the cloud native meetup, but you know, you've got your application frameworks and everything. Hopefully you're not writing your own language or string tokenizer. You're relying on using libraries and frameworks and ways of doing things. I once ran into a person who wrote their own string tokenizer, and I just didn't really know what to do. Like, and then you're going to have some place that you run your software in, right? And above this implicitly is your software, whatever you've written on top. But you need the runtime platform that you run it in, and you got to run this stuff. Otherwise, it's like if software is never installed, does it really exist, right? Like it's got to run somewhere. And then as I've been going over, or I went over the process section, you also have a lot of culture that's enabling this, what we would call culture nowadays, with the process of doing that. And you can see it kind of decompose, I guess, what's the opposite of decomposing? You can see it composing or getting more specific. Like you have these kind of, a little bit of the three things I was mentioning, right? Like a microservices and 12-factor approach, a lot of the cloud automation and orchestration, and most of what people think about as cloud fits in here, right? And then just as an example of how the open source Cloud Foundry approaches this, right? So above, we have, in the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, we have basically all the frameworks and the runtimes and things that are built in to the way of doing it. We have a runtime that runs and orchestrates all your containers, and we've got this great thing. It'd be nice to have the logo up there. It's this horrific shell of a thing. It's hilarious. But like we've got this great way called Bosch that does all the provisioning and configuration. It takes care of all the infrastructure for you. And then most people who are in the cloud native world, they're very aware of, they use words like empathy and culture and like all sorts of stuff like that. They're incredibly navel-gazing, which is turning out to be very helpful. There's a lot of valuable lint in there. So just wrapping up, like if you're interested in this stuff, I wrote a blog series back in the late summer. And then like any good marketer, I completely reused that to write a booklet and a webinar series, so I had less work to do. But you can, if you go to cote.io/pivotal, a lot of what I've talked about, it's like 32 pages, and there's more detail than the kind of like quick run through that I've gone here. And there's also, usually as you can see in the footnotes, I try to have references to a lot of stuff, and I have many references to other material. But this is a good summing up at the moment. And look how fancy that Tron-like cover is. Like, it's a pretty good summary of dealing with the three types of projects I've been seeing a lot recently. That is greenfield projects that are essentially brand new and you're not beholden to the past. And inevitably, like if you're working at a larger organization, you have legacy. And that's usually what they call it. there's all this existing stuff that you have to contend with and work with, and there's strategies for dealing with it and working with it. A lot of the strategies are basically like, how do I quarantine that stuff so I can focus on good things, right? Like, it's a bit of a burning out the underbrush situation. And then there's also the third part of it goes over, if you're trying to apply this to all of your department or your company, what are the best practices and ways we have of doing that? So, tell me what you think of that. And with that, thanks for listening in here. I always like to end with this bit of quotage from the Agile Manifesto, because it's optimistic, and I think it is nice. Like, I use software every day, and so whatever we can do to help people make software better will probably make my life better, less stressful. Aside from electricity getting knocked out and seeing if I survive that. But with that, I'll hand it back over for a demo so you can see the ponies.